I'd like to ask about your role in this digital economy crucible.
Hmm.
So, how would you define what is digital economy? How do you see that? What does it mean, and how do you see that concept evolving into the future?
First off, it's only going to get bigger, and it's only going to become. It's generally just going to become more and more prevalent, for better or for worse. The digital economy, the boundary of the digital economy versus the regular economy is becoming more and more blurred. It's harder to understand. I think it's still quite easy from the agrarian economy to the digital economy. There's still some boundaries you can still understand. Maybe robotics will start to like bridge that a little bit, in terms of food making and food production. But the regular economy that we have, so much of it is digital. I think it's hard to know where that line is. I think it blurs a lot. And I think what is happening though is that more and more things are becoming digitalized and becoming digital. In a way, it's kind of democratization, that your phone can do so many different things. But at the same time, then that means that your phone becomes so much more central to your ability to do the things that you want to do. So it democratizes your ability to do work, but it also makes it makes your capacity to do work without your phone nearly impossible.
Right,
So
I
that's
see.
the double-edged sword of it.
Yeah,
Like, you get the ability to do more things, but without it, you can't do nearly anything. There are certain countries, like you mentioned, I'm Irish Danish. In Denmark, you can't not have an online presence. They have a central, what's called e-box system that the government will email you on, your school will email you through, your university will email you through, you'll get your dental appointments through it, you'll get your bank details through it, maybe not your details, but you'll get bank appointments. Anytime you deal with the social services, they'll come through that, and that's totally digital. And effectively, that's the economy. You can't do anything without access to all those things, as an individual. And then when the social society, everyone's doing that, that's part of the digital economy.
that leads to a kind of the vision of total connectivity of everyone
Hmm.
everywhere
Hmm.
into one global network of, I like to call it Internet of Minds at some point. Evolve into it, I think.
Yeah, if there's a feedback loop that people interact with it, the e-box system is generally one directional. Like, you use it as an information tool, but you don't necessarily get to vote. And I think you get the internet. I'm not sure what you mean by the Internet of Minds, but what I would immediately, when you said that, I'm thinking that you would have that if you have feedback back to the central powers, the ability to vote, or to like give your opinion that would be heard. Then you'd really have this mindset that everyone is connected to, as opposed to a more autocratic or centralized government structure.
Right. Well, it doesn't have to be centralized either. It could be
Yeah,
distributed, right? So
true.
I could connect to anyone through digital channels, just like we're doing today, right?
Yeah,
We
no,
have
totally.
we have the tools to do it already.
Yeah. Yeah. And you asked my role in the Digital Economy Crucible. So, for clarity, the Digital Economy Crucible was a training program that I was a part of, that was organized and originated out of Swansea University, but it was a UK-wide training program with professionals from all over the UK. I was a little bit of an oddball there, because I was really a chemist and engineer talking about carbon nanotubes and nanomaterial structures. But whereas other people were talking about human computer interactions and legal aspects, or so what, of the digital economy, I was really interested in the digital economy from the perspective of, when we have the carbon nanotubes that we strive to make, which are single wall armchair carbon nanotubes that can conduct electricity 1,000 times better than copper. You can make wires, kilometers long out of a mass that's no more than a tablespoon of sugar. All right, and conduct large high voltage capabilities over long distances. That type of democratization of power, of energy power, electricity power, is going to change the ballpark of geopolitics. And I was thinking of the digital economy and my own world of making carbon nanotubes from the context of, in the future, when we have this wire and we're able to share electricity, electricity will become its own form of currency. And actually, in a way, electricity will be more valuable than currency, because electricity can do work, whereas currency still has to go through people's interpretation of what value is. And you see what happens when currencies get devalued. It changes. But a watt and a kilowatt is a watt and a kilowatt. And you're always going to get a certain amount of electric lumens out of a light bulb, and you're going to get a certain amount of mileage out of a car. regardless of what your value, your currency value is of it, but your energy value of it is almost like determined by natural law or the abilities of engineers to turn that into work. So the digital economy, for me, I was fascinated to understand, was anybody looking at this far-fetched future where you have the ability to transmit electricity lossless? And I imagined a scenario in my application. I presented it that someone in the Shetlands, for example, it's very windy up there. They've got a windmill farm. They generate their own electricity, and their son or their daughter goes to school in London. It's very far away, and they don't really have much money because they live in the Shetlands, but they have a lot of electricity. So what they can do is they can package electricity and send it to the apartment complex or the home of their son and daughter, because it goes straight to the home and it goes into their battery pack. And that's how they can support their child to live in an expensive neighborhood, because they can supplement their electricity costs because they're generating electricity nearly 1,000 miles away, 600 miles away.
Now, this is really, really interesting idea, considering energy as a form of currency, because, as you said, it carries intrinsic value.
Yeah.
The challenge we have is to make it ubiquitous, to have the really global grid that's everything is connected, and then you can truly democratize it and make it available to everyone and value it the same way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when there's an incident in a foreign country, it says send a text message and you send a couple of pounds to the Red Cross or something like that. You could send a couple of kilowatts.
Well, so this is when you talk about money and currency, the term currency really didn't come about until money began to flow, and that's what caused us to start calling it currency. Now what you're talking about is, but even when it was gold, it was still sort of an intangible, in the sense that gold is useful in many ways, but the way we use it in money, or have used it in money, it still doesn't have that much intrinsic value. It's all an abstraction. Yeah. And now money and currency is completely abstracted. Paper money used to be on the gold standard. Now it's not, mostly. Then it's electronic. And you're talking about flipping that completely upside down in a way that is really mind-blowing. I'd never thought of that.
And we had an episode, actually, we recorded with Professor Asachi, and we talked about the value of money and currency and where it could go. And yes, the currency, the money, needs to store value and provide the means to exchange value. Yeah. So now, yes, if we have the global ubiquitous energy system, the grid, that can store value and let people exchange that value for other things, and everybody values it the same way, I can clearly see the future that way might actually be very interesting. Yeah. And if this kind of comes from like my interpretation of what Rick Smalley was looking to do, like some of the original graphics that he used to have, and he published it in the Material Research Society letter. I forget the specifics, but he had a graphic with 6 different locations on the globe. They called it the terawatt challenge, because in these 6 different locations there was enough incident solar energy in a day. Or actually on the globe, we receive enough solar energy in one day that we consume an entire year. So that's how much overspill of solar energy there actually is. The challenge is collecting it and then distributing it. And the distribution is what I'm working on, is making a material to make that a no-brainer, a non-problem. I was thinking, right, let's put ourselves into that position where it already exists and start thinking about that now. What's it going to look like? What's it going to mean? If you're going to be sending in Europe power from the Sahara to Central Europe and Northern Europe, then you're already developed this global infrastructure that electricity is just going to be going across continents. That changes geopolitics, especially in terms of seeking out oil from certain locations and then having to extract it and protect the extractors and stuff like this. And I started to think about it from the context of blockchain. Could blockchain be the potential solution to maximizing trust in the system, so that mother or father in the Hebrides, in the Shetland or northern UK, Scotland, can send their electricity to their son or daughter in London and know that it got there? No, absolutely. I can follow the train of thought on blockchain. Yes, decentralized ledger with total trust and inability to tamper with the record. Well, you could still do it, but not on a global scale because there is no centralized ledger and place that stores all the records. No, I think this is a great idea.
Well, the transaction verification capabilities of blockchain in a lot of senses may be a lot more important than cryptocurrency, which has all the headlines. Cryptocurrency, in a sense, your electric currency could get rid of the need of cryptocurrency.
Well, it would give people the ability to do stuff. I mean, that's what money does. It gives you the ability to do things. Yeah. You can't eat money, but you can buy food with money. Energy gives you the ability to keep yourself warm. And so you mentioned the Energy Safety Research Institute. The aspect of the safety is safety in supply, including generation and supply and distribution. Because once you take away energy infrastructure, you'll have chaos. I believe. I could be wrong, but I would say you have general chaos. Like, look at a scenario where there is an immediate extraction of energy. For example, what's just out in the wildfires down in Hawaii. One of the first things people are going to have to do after they give themselves some hugs and come to terms with the shock of the human catastrophe that they have to go through, they have to start generating or getting energy. They have to start turning on lights to find people. They have to start building shelter. All of that requires a certain degree of energy. And nowadays, a large part of that is electrical energy. And so that energy gives you the ability to have a social order.
And also, you should just think about even using our devices today, right?
Absolutely.
We can't function if our phone's not charged, if our computer's not charged, if anything is not charged. It's basically deemed useless. So when you think of that electricity that way and how important it is, or critical actually, in fact, for human civilization, it just brings everything into perspective.
Totally. And here in Europe, we've just gone through this scenario where you have the conflict in Ukraine, the war on Ukraine, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, created a scenario where energy prices started to skyrocket. Large industrial body or industrial companies like BASF in Germany were wondering, are they, because of the squeeze on gas, because they use so much gas to generate their power, to make surfactants, to make solvents, to make reagents, that make toothpaste, that make things go in tires, the normal stuff that you forget about, that you take for granted. They were wondering, were they going to be able to do that? Because there was a squeeze on energy and natural resources. And so really here we've had that brought to the attention quite strikingly. And I think we got away with it this last winter because it wasn't too cold. And a lot of people were able to leave their electricity turned off or their gas turned off. But that's not always going to be the case. And you need some degree of heating, you need some degree of electricity. And if you don't have it, you really start to suffer, and you end up in a scenario where what's energy poverty, where you're spending over 10% of your income is, if that's spent on energy, then you're in an energy poverty scenario.
Ben, you mentioned already the three-body problem by Csikszentmihalyi, and I hope I'm pronouncing the name right. Let's broaden the horizons here.
Okay.
That the modern investment structure arguably started around the 1600s, but the roots can be found very, very early as the ancient Babylonia, 18th century, before Christian era, and the Code of Hammurabi. Now, obviously, this is an integral mechanism of our life and our wealth preservation and growth. Do you see this as the fundamental mechanism in the future? Let's think about next 2-3 centuries going forward. Will we still define wealth the same way?
Wow, Mikhail, I'm so glad you asked that question. That's a great question. And I think that what you call the modern investment structure or the way that the world economy has kind of evolved to do two things really efficiently. And the first one is, how are you going to pay for stuff? So I think that the economy that has morphed over time is just a really awesome way to pay for stuff. It's so easy. It's so seamless. It's so one button, easy to pay for stuff. I also think that it has encouraged people over time to do a very important thing, and that is to specialize in something. So as opposed to living out in the woods on your own and having to do everything, create your shelter and hunt and do all these things, we've created a society where I'm really good at X or Y or Z, and that's what I'm going to do because it's going to maximize my utility. So from a utility maximizing standpoint, I do think that there's going to be some form of this as we go, into the future. And it's kind of cool to me the way science fiction incorporates this concept. Like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Red Mars trilogy by Robinson. It's been out for a while, but it's about the colonization of Mars. And one of the ways that it's paid for is that they create a reality TV show. And everybody on Mars is on this reality TV show, and it helps to pay for the mission. So you get this sense of, I got to pay for all this stuff. How am I going to do it? So, you see that concept. Obviously, Dune, very famous book, Dune, is all about economics. It's like, who's going to be able to control the supply of a commodity that everybody wants?
So you find something of value. Right?
Yes, exactly.
And it could be different in different ages.
That's right. And different constructs, different realities, however you want to see it. But, it also answers a very important question, and that is, how are you going to motivate people, right? So there's a book called Beyond Star Trek that came out like about 10 years ago that I read, and it tries to explain the concepts behind the show, and we're all very familiar with the show. And one of the things is in the Next Generation series, they have, this thing called holodeck, where you can, earn time in the holodeck or take your vacations in the holodeck and basically kind of create whatever reality you want. And the author of Beyond Star Trek, one of his arguments is, if there was really a holodeck, no one would ever leave it, right? Because you can create whatever reality you want, any experience you want. Like, sounds pretty great to me, right? But here's the thing, right? What about the holodeck repair guy? I mean, you're going to have a holodeck repair guy. So you're going to have to motivate that guy somehow. So how are you going to do that, right? So probably some way economically is probably the way you do it. So I know that Star Trek always says, oh, we have no need for money and all that stuff. That is just that's not in any way in any type of reality that I can see. And actually in some of the Star Trek novels, there was one Star Trek novel that I read about these renegade Vulcans. And the way they got rich was they figured out how to trade commodities. Like, they created these quantitative ways to trade commodities. So I'm like, okay, now that I get, right? If you need a bunch of money, then you figure out how to make that bunch of money, and then you can go out and buy stuff. So yeah, I think this is pretty much here to stay. Now, that's not to say that maybe we won't have universal, basic income, or there's been some talk about that, especially with, AI, and that's a whole nother conversation. But I think it would only fulfill very, very base needs and not pay for, cool stuff that we all want, like Rolex watches and Teslas and stuff like that,
Right. So, and that leads perfectly to my next question. And as you started talking Star Trek, so this is exactly what I had in mind. And actually, that holodeck repair service could be performed by AI.
Absolutely.
You don't need anything there anymore. But imagine that a scenario from Star Trek, right? So if something like a replicator is invented, and suddenly anyone can get any object, anything, anytime, anywhere, anything they want for free, what will it mean for wealth management and for the definition of what is wealth and what has value? Do you think in that case physical objects will lose any value, and we will need to create new mechanisms to define this relational and spiritual wealth? Maybe that will serve as the new mechanism that we're going to exchange. What other future scenarios of redefining wealth can you imagine in that case?
Sure. So bringing up the old replicator, huh? So
or nanofabricator. In 3D printing circles, people dream about nanofabricator, right? So imagine 3D printing at the nano level, because you have your the chemical elements, your protons, neutrons, electrons, it's everywhere. So if you can just reassemble them into something else, would that be possible? Would that be a dreamlike mechanism or machine, however you call it, a printer?
Well, I mean, here's the thing about replicators. So let's go back to the fundamental rules of replication, right? So as a longtime watcher of the show, right, you can't say, "Hey, replicator, make me a phaser," because that's too complicated. You can get a replicator to replicate some of the pieces of the phaser, and then you have to put it together. So first of all, am I in agreement that that is accurate? Because my whole thesis is built on this assumption. So am I correct that a replicator can't make a phaser completely by itself? Do I get any buy-in on this?
I think this is something we could stretch, and as a thought exercise, that there are two paths here. One is, okay, there is a limitation to what is possible, and we could build some maybe materials or simple structures, but
yeah,
yes,
right.
not something extremely complicated. But in the other scenario, you can say, well, what if I have unlimited power and unlimited way of assembling these molecules or elementary particles into anything I want?
Okay.
What would happen then?
Let's use something a little bit more simple than a phaser. Let's make it a pizza. So let's say, your replicator can make a pizza. I think we can all agree with that, right? So I can order a pizza anytime I want. Okay. So there's two sort of, things behind that, two scenarios you could say behind that. Scenario one is my replicator can create a pizza, but when it does that, all the flour molecules and the water molecules and the cheese molecules that I have in my position, the population of those goes down. So basically I'm taking a raw commodity and making a finished good out of it. Now, one form of replication is, I guess, me calling Pizza Hut and having them deliver the pizza. But instead of me having to pay for my replicator pizza with the supplies, I just use some sort of fiat currency of some sort, kind of a deal. But if you're going to make it easier for me to get a pizza, I'll probably eat more pizza. So if scenario one is intact, then I'm just going to have a lot less flour and cheese and stuff. And I would think the value of those things would go up. So things haven't really changed that much with the replicator, except things are a lot easier. Maybe I'm fatter because I'm not on Ozempic, although I'm sure they have Ozempic in Star Trek somewhere. That's a totally other discussion. If you're talking about a replicator that can just create things out of air or create things out of any kind of molecule, that's a different story than
space dust.
Then space dust would be a lot more valuable maybe. But, if you're creating value, then the things that you use to create value are going to be more valuable, right? So, I think it would create a scenario where I think people would look at wealth differently. And the good part of my heart would say, well, maybe people would just be a little bit more satisfied with the possibility of having whatever they want. But at the end of the day, I think it comes back to the whole motivation question. And there's a limit to living in a paradise where you have to do very little to get something in return. It's like at some point, somebody's got to create a technology that allows you to do that. How are you going to motivate them to do that? So in a lot of ways, things would change, but in a few very significant ways, nothing would change. So that's the answer I'm going to go with, Mikhail. I hope that's not disappointing to you.
It makes a lot of sense. And I think what we talked about earlier, Maslow hierarchy of needs, basically with this technology, with that thought experiment, the most basic needs are met by everyone in that scenario. So that goes away, but the hierarchy still stays, right? You still need that intellectual and spiritual attainment and some different goals and different motivation that you need to find. That doesn't go anywhere. So hopefully in that scenario, we reorient ourselves to meeting more of those other needs that currently are on top of that pyramid.
Yeah, I think, and this is something that my wife actually said, which I thought was particularly insightful. She said, everybody needs problems to solve. And if you don't have a problem to solve, you'll make one up. You'll create a problem to solve. And I think that's just a need it's a need that we have. We have this intellectual capacity, unlike, no other species on the planet that we know of has, right? That we can change things and we need to exercise that ability. That's how we're built. That's how we're made.
Right. And the energy or the lack of energy causes that disparity. And that's where all the greed and the fighting or the differences in energy costs will definitely come into play in the future.
Yeah, one of the curious things I learned from reading Jason Hickel, his book isn't on my shelf right now, but if anybody's interested in this, he writes a lot. He was thinking about, we often hear the argument, if we make it more efficient, we'll use less of it. Well, it's actually the opposite that occurs, that the more efficient we make something, the more we use of it.
More, yeah.
We find the ways to need it more. Yeah. And that has certainly happened with energy, and that has certainly happened with materials and wealth. There's just such there's just such a disparity across the globe. I think the only way that we can make it is if we find some way to satiate our wants and our desires in a manner that is non-destructive to the rest of the planet and the rest of the people on the planet. It's a very top level argument, because I'm not a social scientist, but I do believe that it's really down to social science about whether we're going to survive the next 200 years. We can engineer our way out of several problems, but we will probably engineer our way into them as well. So we need another thinking, and I think it's more a social science. Something has to change in the human experience on this planet, and I don't think it's technology that's going to bring us there.
I agree with you. You said greed. And this is the basic part of the equation here. We can engineer our way out of many problems. You're absolutely right. We've done it in the past. We keep doing it. We keep inventing new things. But the basic greed will take over if we let it. And that's the basic challenge here. And it's part of human nature. So that I think the answer for me is, can we actually change ourselves? Right. And that's not the technology question.
What important trends do you see in society today that change us as humans? There are more parts to the question, but let's start with that. What do you see the current trends that have changed us or are changing us as humans?
I'm grateful that you asked. It's a broad question. Thank you. And I'm going to take a step back from my day-to-day purpose, and I've realized over the last 10 years that the only trend that really matters and is going to matter for our future well-being as a society is the increasing gap in equality and the increase in inequality, because no progress we make in technology will help us if only the asset owners benefit from those improvements in technology. So we really have to fix that. That's the trend. I'm not the one seeing it. Economists are seeing this growth of inequality, and I'm deeply concerned. Ultimately, it will lead to civil strife and war.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Vision 2222. And if you enjoyed what you heard, please subscribe, like, and share with your friends. Please also comment, and we'll do our best to respond.